to AEDT 4120, Serious Gaming and Simulations. Week 4, Digital Game-Based Learning, Part 2, Video Clip 3 of 3. I'm Professor Bill Kapralos, and over the next few minutes we'll be discussing what players learn by playing video games. However, prior to doing so, here's the list of analysis questions for this particular video clip. Number 1. What are the 5 levels of learning that occurs within a game? Number 2. What are some of the negative concerns expressed by some about the learning that occurs in games? And finally, number 3, what are some of the things learned from playing video games? Video game learning. As we discussed in the past, many negative opinions have been expressed regarding video games. Many see video games as completely mindless and believe that kids don't learn anything beyond hand-eye coordination, if that. They believe that kids learn only about the game itself and nothing about real life from these games. However, whether the learner is aware of it or not, there is plenty of learning that takes place as they're playing a video game. And in this video clip, we will discuss the 5 levels of learning that occurs within a game. The how, the what, the why, the where, and the when. Looking at level 1, learning how to do something. As one plays the game, one learns gradually or quickly the moves of the game, how to move their avatar, defeat the enemy, progress to the next level, amongst other things. And there's additional non-conscious messages that one also learns in the process of doing so. They learn that they have control of what goes on within the screen or within the game, unlike traditional television and movies, where they are passive viewers. Now, what implications does this have for the real world? Well, when we consider pure fantasy games, the explicit how to do it may be useless in the schoolyard or workplace. But learning how to flip a Tetris piece, for example, may enhance a player's mental spatial processing abilities. The more a game simulates anything in the real world, the more one learns about how to do things in that world. Now, of course, one cannot learn to do everything in a video game. There are kinesthetic cues, for example, that you need to learn in a real airplane simulator and can't learn from a video game simulation of an airplane. Not only do players learn about how to do things, but they're constantly practicing these things over and over. So this learning becomes internalized and becomes second nature. Of course, keep in mind that just because someone learns to do something doesn't mean one has learned when or whether one should do it. The how level extends deeper to more transferable learning by enhancing non-game specific skills. So heavy game players learn how to parallel process and multitask, and they have to in order to succeed in the game. How do we know that learning at the how level actually takes place? Well, we can observe it. People who practice something over and over learn it and get better at it, and this of course is common knowledge. Level 2, learning what to do in a game. Players learn about what to do in any particular game and what not to do in a particular game. In other words, they learn the game rules. Now, the rules of a game teach you what is possible and or doable within that game. And the process of game playing can be viewed as learning to understand some rule code. In non-video games, players learn the rules before they start playing. However, with video games, where the rules are built into the program itself, into the actual software itself, players learn the rules as they play, and they learn the rules through trial and error. What do video game rules teach kids about real life? Well, they make a player, regardless of their age, reflect, at least subconsciously, and compare the game to what they already know about life. Players are constantly comparing the rules of whatever game they are playing to what they have learned elsewhere about life. And of course, the more the rules reflect the real world that the player knows, the more they believe the game reflects reality, and vice versa. How do we know that these comparisons do actually occur? Well, games with wildly unfair or inaccurate rules get quickly identified by players as bogus, and they don't get played much. Game designers spend a considerable amount of time adjusting the rules of the game to make sure that the rules do seem reasonable to the players. And of course, players also learn about breaking rules. Even when we consider very young game players, they learn to shout, "Hey, you can't do that," or "Hey, that's not fair," as soon as somebody cheats or tries to cheat within a game. Level 3, learning why they do something. Players learn why they do something. In other words, they learn the strategy of a game as they play it. Successful players learn that in some games and situations to succeed they need to attack openly. In others they do so stealthily. In some they need to hoard and be selfish, yet in others they need to cooperate, etc. Many real-life lessons are learned in doing so. Game strategy and tactics are loaded with such learning about real life. Like the rules, strategy in games must be lifelike for the game to make sense, even if the game is completely fantasy-based. Now recall from previous discussions that the military has embraced the use of video game-based learning. And in general, for millennia, militaries have been aware that strategy can be learned by playing games. They have adopted video games, serious games in particular, to their own learning needs far ahead of the curve. There are many other deeper lessons learned from video game play than what we previously discussed. So for example, cause and effect, long-term winning versus short-term gains, order from seeming chaos, second-order consequences, complex system behaviors, counterintuitive results, and the value of persistence. Level 4, learning where you are, or in other words, the context level. This encompasses a huge amount of cultural learning that goes on in video games, and psychologists tell us that video games are one means through which kids learn to understand their world. The player learns about the game world and the values it represents. They acquire cultural metaphors and images to use in describing the real world. It is on this level that players learn ideas, both consciously and unconsciously as they play their game. And of course, video games reflect the big cultural ideas and myths, so they relate to right versus wrong, good versus evil, victory versus defeat, amongst others. Players learn to handle myth, lore, danger, betrayal, the fact that there is always someone bigger and more powerful than they are. Players learn to handle cultural relativity and deal with different people and roles. And players learn to identify with the game characters and with the cultures that they inhabit. One of the most effective game techniques for transferring the where component of learning is immersion. The more one feels they are within a culture, the more one learns from it, especially non-consciously. And video games are becoming more and more immersive, in part thanks to technological advancements. To what degree does immersion affect learning? It does affect learning, but can we quantify this? What do you think? Does immersion have any effect on learning? If we are more immersed in a game or a simulation, will the learning increase? Immersion and its effect on learning is a rather open topic that requires plenty of investigation. Finally, level 5, learning when and whether. And this is the ultimate level of learning. It's the deepest, most interesting learning that occurs in video games. It involves non-conscious emotional messages, or in other words, the subtext. And players learn to make value-based and moral decisions, for example, decisions about whether something is right or wrong. Of course, it's also the most problematic and controversial learning level. The mechanisms for creating and learning within level 5 range from the extremely simple to the most complex. At the simplest level, learning comes through the game's amplification of certain factors, for example through repetition and other means, and the reduction of others. At more complex levels, it comes through the use of allegory and symbols, and through the manipulation of images, situations, sounds, music, and other emotion-producing effects and combination of effects, as in movies and in film. But can't this cause problems? It's hard to argue that the combination of amplification and emotional cues in certain games doesn't lead players to learn that the answer to "is it okay to kill the character in a game context" is yes. Are they also learning about this in real life, and do they generalize these messages to the actual world? Well, according to Mark Prensky, no, this is definitely not the case. And although a game that encourages killing could encourage a player to kill in real life, the message is do not kill, and this is a part of our cultural context causing us to think twice before killing in real life. As with rules, players are constantly cross-checking automatically and subconsciously with whatever else they know or have heard regarding consistency. So is video game learning positive or negative? There's some major concerns of those who think that the learning is negative, and these are as follows. At the how level, teaching players to do inappropriate things. At the what level, the rules of the game are too restrictive and the games don't leave enough room for imagination. At the why level, strategies for winning many of the games contain too much violence and too many cheats. At the where level, players are being socialized to be loners, misogynists, and social deviants. And at the when and whether level, players are learning to be amoral killers. On the positive side, video games are becoming less restrictive and they're more open to players' imaginations and personalities and other open-ended toy-like elements that lets players exercise their own imagination and tell their own stories. Newer games have multiple winning strategies, and there is also the proliferation of the internet that's bringing social orientation that games always had back again. Of course, as we previously described, video game player demographics are changing. It's no longer the young male playing a first-person shooter. Female, elderly, for example, are now enjoying gameplay. This is the end of the material for this video clip, and this leads us to our synthesis questions. Number 1. Many games have been developed for educational purposes, but are not effective. Given all the benefits of game-based learning and all the learning that occurs in games, why is this so? And finally, number 2, if one game doesn't produce any learning, is this because the concept of game-based learning is faulty? This concludes video clip 3. Thank you.